I'd never really put a lot of stock into the paranormal. Yeah, I love a good ghost story, and there may have been a few weird things that happened to me on occasion, but I always figured there were some real world phenomena that could explain these things away. That is, until a few weeks ago. My husband and I have no kids, it's just us and a couple of cats. We work regular hours, but our jobs are fairly demanding, so we don't have a hard time getting to sleep at night. My husband is prone to occasional bouts of insomnia, but these are very few and far between. When he does have it, he'll toss and turn through the night, but eventually doze off and get a couple of hours of sleep. I noticed he was having trouble sleeping again, doing that restless moving around, trying to get comfortable, got up to turn the air down, so on and so forth. Next morning, I asked if he had trouble sleeping. He said no, he slept like a rock. Something's not lining up here. I told him what I saw him do, and he said he didn't remember it. Said he had a little trouble at first, a brief nightmare that woke him up, but then he fell right back asleep. He didn't remember getting up or anything. He's never sleepwalked, so we didn't really know what to think. Maybe I had dreamed it. We went on about our day and came back home after work, had dinner, and watched TV. I apparently nodded off at some point, then woke up to see my husband sitting straight up looking in the direction of the TV, but it had apparently shut off after so long, so he was watching nothing. A little dazed and confused, I asked him what he was doing. Maybe he had somehow fallen asleep sitting up? I leaned around and looked at his face, and his eyes were open, although I wouldn't say wide open. He had this glazed-over, 1,000-yard stare. I called his name a couple of times, shook him a bit, and he made this noise that didn't really sound like him, a short, quiet growl. He then snapped to and looked at me, said he must have fell asleep. I told him he had been sitting up with his eyes open, and he was a little freaked out, but we nervously laughed it off and went to bed. I usually wake up before he does so I can take my time getting ready in the morning, so he's in bed for a few more minutes. He's been known to sleep in weird positions, arm out to the side, legs going one way but his chest pointed another, but that next morning he was sleeping in a way that I can only describe as contorted. Head was cocked against his shoulder with one arm up against the headboard, other arm wrapped around his face, his legs going totally different directions, one outstretched all the way and the other flexed up with his knee pointed to the ceiling. Everything starting to string together was making me humor the silly notion that he might be possessed or something. I got my shower, came back into the bedroom to see he hadn't moved from that position. His alarm was going off, but he wasn't moving. I gently shook him, and he very quickly woke up, his eyes wide, pupils dilated, looking about the room, his body cracking as he straightened himself back out. I told him the sleeping position he had been in, said he felt fine, no crick in his neck or anything. We again, nervously, tried to laugh it away, but I noticed as we talked, he would smile and then very quickly go back to a neutral expression, not letting the smile linger and fade. He was warm and loving to me, but it felt like spotty cell service, communicating freely and then having nothing from him at all. I went about my day wondering if he was all right. His work was giving him some extra stress, maybe that was working on him. I kept coming back to the feeling that it almost felt like I was talking to someone else, or someone was cutting into our conversations. Again, I'd never really had an overt paranormal experience, but I was beginning to wonder if something of that nature was going on. Then I'd come to my senses. No way, that's just movie stuff. Until that night. It was Friday. We didn't have work the next day, so we weren't concerned about our sleep schedule. He started to crash and went on to bed, but I had a second wind and was reading some stuff on my phone, watching some rabbit hole YouTube videos and playing with the cats. I did get sleepy and go to the kitchen to get a little water before bed. From our kitchen, you can see 3/4 of the way down the hall toward our bedroom. I heard our door open and then footsteps. I stood and watched silently. For some reason, even though I knew it was my husband, I felt on high alert. His footsteps were not his own. Even barefoot, he walked heel-toe, but it sounded like he was shuffling, barely picking his feet up. He came around the corner, almost into our living room, but not quite leaving the hall, and stared directly at me. I playfully said, "Hey," and asked if I could do anything for him, but he just kept staring. For a moment, I felt like it wasn't my husband staring at me. Yeah, it was the same eyes and face, but something was just different enough about his appearance to make him almost appear as a stranger. I said I'd be coming to bed in a minute, finished my water while still looking at him, not wanting to take my eyes off him. He turned around and shuffled back to bed, not a word. I almost didn't want to go sleep in there with him, but I was getting really tired and tried to convince myself he was just being weird, or maybe had taken to some form of sleepwalking. I headed toward the bedroom and saw one of our cats in the living room, eyes wide, staring at our bedroom, tail puffed out. That made me feel really good about everything. I went in and got in bed with him. He rolled over and hugged me, told me good night, and he loved me. I felt a little better, but was still low-key freaking out a little. Asked if he remembered walking into the living room. He muttered some nonsense, so I figured I'd let it go and get some shut-eye. It felt like I was out within seconds, but at some point I woke out of a dead slumber, hair standing on end, that feeling that something isn't right. Had one of the cats knocked something over? Was someone else in the house? I listened for several minutes, not being able to drift back off again, like something needed my attention. I rolled over toward my husband and nearly shrieked. His eyes were open, gazing right at me, locking eye contact, and his mouth was curled up in this wretched, closed-teeth, open-mouthed smile. I froze. I didn't know what to do. This definitely didn't look like my husband, and I couldn't make my body react. I couldn't think of any course of action. I just stared back into his deep, empty eyes, terrified of what I was looking at. I finally mustered the courage to softly utter his name. His smile somehow grew more sinister, and he subtly shook his head, then rolled over away from me and was facing the other wall. I laid there for several more minutes, contemplating what had just happened, playing out different scenarios and trying to get a grasp on what my life was becoming. Had my husband really been taken over by someone else? He had shown no signs at all of dissociative identity. This was something that had come on all of a sudden, and I was laying here, wondering if I should call the police or a preacher. Then, quite suddenly, a wave of calm came over me, no idea where from, and I drifted off to sleep again, and was awoken by bright morning light. I reached over to wake my husband up, hoping he was who I remembered him being and not some imposter. He rolled over and said good morning, seemed just fine. I didn't have the heart to tell him what had happened, so I kept it to myself and just asked him if he slept okay. He said he had one really bad dream where he was wrestling with somebody, couldn't see his face, but he just knew somebody was trying to pin him down, and he was trying to break free. And eventually he did shuck the attacker off, and the dream ended. Other than that, he slept great. The rest of the day I observed and just tried to see if he didn't do anything else strange. He acted fine. Night came and I was waiting for some other theatrics, but nothing happened. And since then, he's been like normal. I've even stayed up late and gotten up early a couple of times to see if he's doing anything weird, but I've not seen a thing. Maybe that first nightmare he had was the initial contact with whatever it was that was in his head, and that last one was him finally breaking free of it. I feel like I should talk to him about it, but how do I tell my husband he may have been possessed? Recently, my work commute has been made shorter via a bypass they opened up that runs around downtown. There doesn't seem to be much down that road other than trees and wildlife until you pass a few odd roads that run off to each side. Some of these roads are unassuming, but a few have locked security gates just a few yards in. This isn't a big metropolitan area where government facilities are around every corner, but there are a few facilities dotted throughout there. I would occasionally see an all-black or all-white SUV come suddenly appear on the main road, or I'd occasionally see a convoy of police cars marched for towns many miles away. Never really knew what it was all about, didn't really want to ask. But one day, out of one of these roads comes a convoy of at least 8 or so completely blacked out, newer model SUVs with dark windows and no license plate. They are peeling out one after the other and quickly continuing in the direction that I am going, so I slow down and let them file out. After the last one goes, I speed back up and sort of follow loosely behind them. Well, out from that road comes yet another SUV after I had passed, so now they are behind me and I've cut in line. This has happened once or twice before, so I didn't really think anything of it until I look up in my rear view and see this car is tailing me. No one else is coming the other way, so I slow down so he can pass me. He just stays on my bumper. There's not really a place to pull off, so I just sheepishly get going again toward the main highway. I see the other cars ahead of me turn right, the same direction I need to go to get home, and here is this car behind me hot on my heels. It's a 4-lane road though, so he should be able to just go around me. Nope. I pull onto the highway and he stays right on me. I even get into the other lane to get out of his way in case he's just showing out. He falls in behind me. Now I'm getting really creeped out. The other SUVs are starting to disappear into the distance. They've got somewhere to be. But I dare not go a single mile per hour over the speed limit in case this is an officer of some kind. I'm starting to think ahead. What if this guy follows me home? My turn in my neighborhood is coming up. I take the turn and so does he. My mind is racing now. Have I done something wrong? Would there be some kind of warrant out for me? This is an officer, right? There are a few more turns to get into my subdivision. He follows me the entire way. My house is a couple of streets from the main entrance, but now I'm starting to think I shouldn't go straight home. I take the long way around, hoping maybe he'll lose interest or not want to raise any suspicion at least. I even double around and go back the way I came, and still, he is right there. I finally decide that I can't keep driving indefinitely, so I turn onto my street and into my driveway. If this is to be a confrontation, so be it. As I pull under the carport and check behind me, he continues on up the street. Am I free? I park the car and get out to see that he's turned his car around in the T intersection at the corner of my block and is pointed toward my home. I freeze and try to look through the windshield, but between the tint and sun glare, I can't see anything. Not taking my eyes off the car, I reach for my phone and go to call the police. Either they can give me an explanation or send help. I look down to see that my phone has no service. Not just low bars, but the icon telling you there's no signal. I'm starting to panic. I slowly work my way inside the house, looking over my shoulder every couple of seconds to see if they do anything. I get in and check my phone again, still no service. I try to go on Wi-Fi to check social media or a search site to see if anything is going on that would help explain this. While the router seems fine, I cannot connect to the internet. The panic really sets in now. How bad of a coincidence is this? Or is it even a coincidence? I'm holed up in my house, wondering why I've been followed, what I did that got so much unwanted attention on me. I look back out the window and there he still is. I pace around the house for a few minutes, trying to figure out what to do. I check a couple times and then see him start to slowly drive off back down my street. I look back down, check my phone. I have signal again and can connect to the internet. I fall onto my couch and start searching everything I can think of, but of course there's no answer or even a clue. I go back outside to check my mail, and the sweet older lady who lives across from me comes out and asks if I knew the person in that car. I briefly explain what had happened, and she says she had tried to call the police as well, but her phone also had no signal all of a sudden. I don't know who exactly that was, who they were affiliated with, and if they had the ability to jam my cell and internet signals from inside their vehicle, but the whole scenario made me extra cautious of unmarked vehicles, and for a couple of weeks I took the long way to work again. I like to go camping every now and again, tent camping out in the woods for just a night or two usually. Sometimes I go with friends, sometimes it's just me. I normally don't feel scared when I do. I'm pretty chill around wildlife, and I tend to keep a couple of things on me for protection. I also tend to go in the colder months when the wildlife is less active. I have a few spots I rotate through, but I'll scout a new place sometimes and see what it's about. I found one such place trail riding one day, a big open clearing in otherwise untouched forest. I made a note of it and came back a week later, ready to make camp. I did like I normally do, build a fire, pitch the tent, get a little snack and drink bin ready. I sat by my fire and got it under control, roasted a couple of weenies over it, then started a little hike around the area. From the main clearing I was set up in, there'd be a narrow path leading to another smaller clearing, then another path to another clearing, and so on. They would branch off and circle back around, so it was like a web of trails. There was really nothing of note, no obvious landmarks or really anything to guide yourself by. Actually, were it not for my campsite that I could make out through the trees, I might have gotten lost. The only thing I noticed was the ground was very rough and hilly, almost wavy. I had to step down and over a few mounds in the dirt to navigate around. I didn't really think much of it at the time, might have been some weird erosion due to how rain fell through the trees or something. It started to get too dark for me to see without a flashlight, and I made my way back toward camp. As I did so, I got this shot of adrenaline, like I needed to hurry up. I don't know why, that very rarely happens. I turned and looked around in case some animal was watching me from the shadows, but I didn't see anything. I continued on, using the glow from my fire as my north star until I made it back. I instantly felt better, but as the night went on, I had this feeling like I was in a cage being looked at from all sides. My fire was casting light all around. I didn't see anything. I didn't hear any sounds. There was nothing. I even shined my flashlight a couple of times, saw nothing. Eventually the feeling wore off, and I started to relax a little more. I leaned back in my chair and looked up at the stars as I usually do before starting to drift off to sleep. I gathered myself up and got into my tent. Fell asleep pretty quick, but woke up at some hour of the early morning, couldn't tell you what time it was. There wasn't a sound outside my tent. This was middle of fall, so again, most critters shouldn't be rustling, but you'd still expect to hear something out there. I laid as still as I could, listening for a crack of a tree branch or a breath or growl from some animal. Nothing. I kept laying there, trying to go back to sleep, but couldn't bring myself to do it. It was like some super high frequency was buzzing in my ear, keeping me alert. I couldn't lie still any longer, so I reached for my pistol and got up to ease my head out of the tent and look around. As I unzipped the flap, I saw that it was actually just barely daylight. However, all the sunlight was shrouded in some of the densest fog I've ever seen. I surveyed my campsite carefully to make sure nothing was waiting for me out there. I stood up and fully exited my tent, looking around and wiping the sleep from my eyes. I sat in my camping chair, stretched my arms and legs out, then looked upon the woods surrounding me. I froze. As my eyes adjusted, I could make out slim, dark figures in the fog, like wisps of smoke but unmoving. At first I saw 1, 2, then a few, then realized there were probably a dozen or so out there, looking back at me. All from within the trees, the very places I had walked through the previous evening. The adrenaline started to kick in again, but I couldn't bring myself to move. I couldn't decide whether to confront them or just try to live with it. I thought about going into the tent, but I almost didn't want to let these things out of my sight, so I just sat, unblinking, trying to wait them out. After a couple of minutes, I did see a couple of them start to move and some of them slowly disappear. After a few more minutes of intent examination, the figures all went away, and I also noted the fog was starting to lift. As soon as the actual sun started to peek through, I got my stuff together and broke down camp quicker than I ever have. As I left, I still felt eyes on me from somewhere. I wouldn't say I felt in danger, but something otherworldly happened that morning. I had stumbled in a place I didn't feel like I belonged. Maybe it was a trick of the mind, but it felt very real to me. I thought back to those lumpy areas along the trails and wondered if there might be some connection. When I got back home, I tried to look up what I could on it, but I couldn't find a single thing. Maybe for the best. I just know to avoid that area in the future. Seems to already be occupied.